Hey guys, welcome back to my C# tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to be going over the class and the concept of the class. So you may have been hearing these terms called, object-oriented programming. What is the class? What's a method? What's a property? All of these things are going to be covered in this video, okay? Pretty basic stuff when you think about it. But to a new developer, it's obviously very new, very unknown. So I'm just going to try and break it down in the easiest way that I possibly can. So the class. Well, here we have a class. It's called program. And inside we have this main method. So if we just don't even think about the words on the screen, just the structure, we have the namespace, which contains the class, which contains a method. Now each class can have multiple methods and each namespace can have multiple classes, okay? So the namespace is basically just a container for a set of related classes and namespaces. So like this namespace is called tutorial. If I make a new file over here, that namespace will also be tutorial because it's in the root, kind of the root folder under the project. But if I make a new folder, and I'll just do right click, add new folder, I'll call it test, and I right click test, add new item, class, C# class, it should be the first thing on your screen, and we just call it SomeClass.cs. This namespace is going to change to tutorial.test. So essentially it's just a chain of directories, and this could go on as far as you wanted it to. Now, before we get into referencing other classes, let's just keep talking about what the class actually serves for us. So down here, let's ignore the program class for now. I'm just gonna Control K and Control C at the same time to comment those at the same time. Highlight, Control K, Control C, pretty handy shortcut. So let's do this. Let's make class my example class. Well, you know what? Before I'll do this, I'll do a better example. I'll just say class car, okay? And we have our opening and closing brackets without a semicolon. We don't need to end this with a semicolon. So we have class car. So in object-oriented programming, you can manipulate objects by declaring them, and each class can have different properties, and I'll explain what a property is excuse me, in a moment. My voice is a little raspy this morning. I'm just waking up. So a property is essentially something that belongs to the type. So this class car is actually a custom type that we have created. So like in C#, there are strings, there are integers, there are doubles, those are all types, but this is our own custom type. And so how do we want to populate this car? So and I will get into the concept of the constructor in a moment, but basically I will actually uncomment this with Control K, Control U. I'm trying to put this in layman's terms and it's a little difficult, but we can instantiate this class by calling its constructor. Now, not all classes have a constructor, but it's generally good practice to include a constructor. So what is a constructor? Well, a constructor is basically a way of saying, okay, when we instantiate this class, let's populate the class's variables. It could be all or none or some of the variables in a certain way, or the properties, I'm sorry. So the cool thing about classes is that they can have their own methods. And when you have a class with properties and a constructor, you can basically preload the class's properties and call those set properties so that the properties are set externally, you can recall those properties within the class after the constructor and use them in your methods. So I know that sounds really confusing if you're new to this concept, but I'll go ahead and demonstrate this. So first of all, we want to go ahead and use the access modifier public, which means that this class can be inherited by other classes and namespaces elsewhere in the program. So let's have a few properties. And if you don't know what a property is, you're about to find out. And it's pretty self-explanatory once you kind of get the hang of it. So a car, well, let's say there's a make. So there could be a public string make. And we'll have a getter. This is called a getter. When you have a property, or you declare a property, and then you can either have a getter or a getter and setter, or just a setter, but you almost never see just a setter. It's usually get set, okay? So this get set means that this property is able to be accessed by whoever calls it, and this setter means this property is also able to be modified by whoever is referencing and instantiating this object, okay? I know that sounds a little confusing, but we'll demonstrate all this, okay? So what else does a car have? Well, obviously it has a model. So we can have our getter and setter for this. And let's do one more. Let's do public int year. Okay, because you're probably not going to be using a float or a double to determine what year the car was made in, okay? It's going to be an integer, like 2010, 2020, etc. So now that we have these properties, let's say we have all cars. All cars are the same year, or I'm just trying to think of an example off the top of my head. But anyway, before we even get into setting these properties, let's just call it in our main method, okay? So we can do car, and we see that this has highlighted in our IDE. Car, my car. Remember the syntax for variable declaration that I talked about in my last video. We have the type, we have the name, equals value. Okay, and our semicolon. So car, my car is equal to new car. Okay, now it looks like we're kind of calling a method here, but this is how you instantiate a non-static class. A static class is determined by using this static keyword, and you don't instantiate static classes, okay? Instead, you would do maybe var model is equal to car.model. You would have to do like public static string for this. Car.model. And you don't instantiate it. But almost always you want to have a non-static class that you instantiate and call, okay? So, if my Visual Studio will not act up. So now when we access the myCar properties and methods by calling the, myCar dot, we execute the dot, we have access to all of its properties. Now, right now they're equal to nothing. They're null, okay? Because we haven't assigned any values to them. But let's say this. Maybe we had a public, maybe we had a string that we wanted to format in a specific way that tells us the make and model and the year of the car. So public string, formatted car string. And, well, first of all, let's just ignore the parentheses there. So we can return, and I'll use string interpolation by using the $ and braces within the string for this. You can follow along if you want. But we can do make is equal to the make. And new line, model, model, new line, year, year. And let's say I want to write this to the console. So instead of writing hello world, I'm going to say console.writeLine my car dot formatted car string. Okay. So normally, because we're not passing in any parameters, you know, for example, I could say, like in a normal method, you know, outside of a class, let's just say I had a, you know, private string, other car string. You don't have to write this, by the way. And we return the same thing. Well, here we need to do this. We need to either pass in a car and then do car.make and car.model, or we just pass all the variables in individually, so string make, string model. You get the idea. But let's say we have 20 methods just like this that reference the same properties. So these properties up here. And we want to reference these over and over and over in different ways, maybe perform some kind of calculation, a database update, whatever it is. Well, we don't want to be, you know, doing that and having to pass in the variables over and over and over. Okay, so that is the point of the constructor, and the constructor sets these variables for us. I know I'm going a little fast, but just bear with me. So if we debug this, and I'll do another console.readLine so that our application doesn't close on us. Make model year 0, okay? So these properties are not set yet. Now, what we could do is we could do this. My car, let's see, car, my car equals new car, brace, and then semicolon at the end, because remember, we're still, we're just declaring the properties here. We could do make is equal to test, model is equal to some model, and year could be 999. Now we will still get the my car formatted string because we have set these properties at the variable or the class instantiation. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, there you go. So make is test, model some model, year 999. But something even better is we can use the constructor to do this for us. So instead of having it declared like this, which is, you know, it can take up a lot of space, especially if you have a lot of properties, is we can do this. Here's how you declare a constructor. Public car, parenthesis, and it's just like you're making a method, but this, the name of this, constructor is always going to be the same name of the class. So public car is for the class car. If I had a program constructor, I would do public program, just like that. But that almost, you never see that really for the program class. So let's say we want to set these properties, and generally the properties are actually declared above here. I just highlighted those, Control X to cut, Control V to paste them up here. So now, let's say we already know what the make is going to be, but we don't know what the year is. We know what the make and model is going to be, but we don't know what the year is. So we're going to take in an integer year, and we're going to say year with a capital Y, because that is the name of this property. Year is going to be equal to the value of the parameter we pass in for the lowercase year down here. And now we can remove the set operator or the set keyword from this property, because we're not setting it externally, we're setting it internally through the constructor. So this getter just means that any class that calls this will have access to the year, but it won't be able to set it because we set that through the constructor. And this could be an infinite amount. You know, maybe you have one variable here, but you perform different calculations on the variable, all kinds of stuff. It's really handy to have constructors, but I'm just using one for this example. So car my car equals new car, but now we have an error. And that's because we're not passing in a year. So let's say we want to pass in 2000. And we're still using the mycar.formatted car string without any parameters passed in here, because these parameters are provided through the class itself, which is really, really handy. That's the whole point of constructors, declaring variables and then being able to call the methods on them without having to pass in anything. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Make model year 2000. Great. So that's exactly what we wanted. And I'm just gonna take a sip here. Excellent. So this is a perfect example of a class method. Now let's make another one though, just to really solidify this. So let's say we want to, okay, let's do this. Let's say public integer year divided by 3. Return year divided by 3. Console.writeLine mycar.year divided by 3. It's as simple as that. We didn't have to change one thing externally, but we were able to just make a new method, use our existing properties, use our existing constructor, and return the year divided by 3. It's as simple as that. Constructors are very handy. Classes are super handy. Think about, oh gosh, 666, oh no. But think about if you had a user object with 20 or 30 or 40 properties, and you needed to have all kinds of methods, you know, user add points, user modify, you know, user add, user remove, etc., etc. These classes can get pretty big, but when you have it properly managed, it's not overwhelming, okay? So let's get into another concept. So, I mean, not a whole new concept, but access modifiers. So I will go over these in more detail in later videos, but the basic ones you want to know are, for now, for the scope of this series, are public. So we have public class car. Whoops. And I'll go ahead and actually just comment this out, and I'll just make a brief new class here. So public class my class. So the most common one you'll see is public, which means this can be accessed by other namespaces. So and other classes, okay? You can't have a private class. That's not really a thing. But what you can have is you can have an abstract. So you can have like public abstract class, which means this abstract keyword basically means the whole point of the class is so that it's inherited from. So this could be a base class, and I'll go over base classes in another video. They're very, very, very handy. But this basically just means the whole point of this class is so that it's inherited from by another class. And by inheriting, I mean, you know, you use a colon my class. You inherit from it, okay? And then there's the static class. So static classes are pretty good for if you have like a configuration file class where all the properties are the same, you're not modifying any properties. Because if you have a large program and you have static properties that you can modify in different places, you might have one developer update it in a certain way, but another developer expects it to behave a certain way. But since the other developer updated the static property, it behaves differently and stuff can go wrong, okay? And so the static class, the abstract class, there's also internal classes, but that's a little bit outside the scope of this video. We might go over that in a later video. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. So we learned what a class was. We learned how to get and set properties. We learned about constructors. We learned about classes that have their own methods within them and referencing variables set through the constructor, or I'm sorry, properties set through the constructor. And we also learned, excuse me, how to properly instantiate a class and a class with a constructor. Okay, so if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you like this video and learned something, feel free to give me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. I try to produce one of these videos every few days for this series. And yeah, I hope you learned something. Hope you found this valuable, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.